for counter-terrorism at Reichman University. She's also a colonel in the reserves for the Israel Defense Forces. Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, tensions in your region are very high. How do you think they stand right now, considering the language we're getting from both sides?
At the tactical level, this event is almost over, if not completely over. That means Hezbollah wanted to do a very harsh attack against all of Israel, including the Tel Aviv area that I live in, and Israel preempted against that specific attack. But that's the tactical level. As you said, in the rhetoric, the war goes on. And the first aspect of the rhetoric is that Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, last night gave a speech, and in it he said lie after lie after lie, and yet we repeat those lies and we amplify them. That's part of the rhetoric.
And we know, of course, amidst all of the messaging that we're hearing, these lies, as you call it, in the last day, that still the solution to this, or the suggested solution and the best way to diffuse tensions, is for a ceasefire negotiation to reach a conclusion. We heard just then that US officials are describing the process as constructive still. Do you think yesterday's events will have had any impact on those talks?
So you just presented this as being all about Hamas or the Gaza Strip or the Israeli hostages that have been held since October 7th. But this is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Why are they part of the same arena? Why do they have this military? It's a terror military that you mentioned before, the North Korean suicide drones that were presented on Saturday, the same kind of equipment that North Korea sends out to the world, the Islamic regime of Iran supplies to Hezbollah. So it isn't, they're certainly connected, but it isn't finish the war against Hamas, another terror organization in the Gaza Strip, and everything is calm with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a terror entity. It is attacking Israel every single day since October 7th, and it can't just be held up to unaccountability as if what they're doing is to help the Palestinians. It's not. It is the terror entity trying to destroy Israel.
But would you accept that a peace deal with Hamas would ease wider tensions and calm other threats down, like from Hezbollah?
So first of all, I absolutely do. And I'm a person of words, and I find it difficult to call it a peace deal. And I am a peace person. But this is about stopping a horrific war. We're going to agree it's a horrific war. And what Hamas started on October 7th, there's nothing good to say about it. All of us want to calm the area. I live in Israel. I live 1,000 meters from the place that Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, stated yesterday that that's where they wanted to attack in the greater area of Tel Aviv. They put it into their own films. That's where I live. Nothing happened here yesterday because the state of Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces, preempted and stopped that attack from happening. But the ones who are destabilizing are the Islamic regime of Iran, are Hezbollah, and I really don't think that they should get out of this with everybody saying, oh, it's about the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. I care about the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and helping out Hezbollah in Lebanon doesn't help them. We need to look at this a bit broader, not just on the focus of the Palestinians.
What did you make of Benjamin Netanyahu's comment yesterday that what happened today was not the end? And what was he referencing there, and how much in the back of his mind is he still, or Israel still very much on high alert to the threat of Iran and the avenging the killing of of Ismail Haniyeh?
Ismail Haniyeh, the Islamic regime of Iran, claimed whatever it claimed. Israel openly claimed that it attacked and killed Fuad Shukul after the killing by Hezbollah of 12 Israeli young people, Druze, up on the Golan Heights, with all of the challenges. We can talk about that there. When Prime Minister Netanyahu says what he says, and on this stage I agree with him, I don't agree with him about a lot of other things, but when it comes to the challenge of what do you do up north? I'm sitting here right now. My kids are not at a school age. But what do you do if you're the mother of children who live up north? And since October 7th, 2023, we're at the end of August 2024, because of Hezbollah, not Hamas, not the Palestinians, because of Hezbollah, a terror entity, you cannot go back to your home. That entire area up north has been under attack. So when the Prime Minister says that it's not over, how do you get Israeli citizens who are inside their country back into their homes, their villages, their towns? There's an entire city that was evacuated. And it's as if right now we're being blamed for that. I want to hear that blame, not just on the question of who's to blame, but of Hezbollah being held accountable. They're a terror entity. And what happens is, yay, I'm a terror entity. Nobody holds me accountable. Hezbollah has changed that. The Islamic regime of Iran that supplies them the weapons and backs them changes that. And on this, I do agree with the Prime Minister of Israel.
What do you think about the role that America's playing here? Because we keep getting these very positive signs the deal is reached. It's largely coming from Washington. And then we hear that, there have been more delays, or that Mr. Netanyahu isn't comfortable with something, or that Hamas isn't comfortable with something, and there is no deal, in fact.
So as an Israeli, I can say that for us, until we get about the closure, it's closure. This isn't a happy moment of our 109 now hostages, hopefully many alive, certainly many of them dead, who are held by Hamas since October 7th. I mean that as an Israeli, I want the closure there. I want the Israeli Prime Minister and the government to do what can be done. But I'm also somebody who looks at things through Hamas eyes, and Hamas is a terror entity. And if I don't represent what Hamas thinks, then I'm not doing my job. And I think that Yahya Sinwar, the one who at the end holds the hostages, holds the Gaza Strip, has been the leader in the Gaza Strip, the terror leader, not the political leader, the terror leader in the Gaza Strip for the last 4 years, that he has no interest in arriving at a resolution. And when we put out the positive signs, I think that the United States and the Egyptians and the Qataris, I even think that perhaps the Hamas leaders, who are also terror leaders, who sit in Qatar, would be willing to arrive at a resolution. I don't think that Yahya Sinwar is, and his centrality in the fact that he was the main mind behind. Sorry.
But I think the same claim can be made of Benjamin Netanyahu himself, that he doesn't want to arrive to a resolution because he is politically motivated to keep the tension and to keep the conflict going. That is something we've heard time and time again. We've heard that as well, that he has been obfuscating and putting more conditions on the table. That is a claim that Hamas have been making consistently. Is it not true that Benjamin Netanyahu is coming under pressure within his own country to seek a resolution to the ceasefire deal, but that it is not politically expedient for him to do so?
And I'm going to push back again. Look at what you just did. You said that the Prime Minister of Israel, that I did not vote for and I do not support and I will continue to protest against, is the same as Hamas leadership, Yahya Sinwar. Allow me to push back at that. I absolutely think that Netanyahu has political ideas. I'll go out and protest every Saturday night, but I'm not willing for that comparison between the state of Israel, the government that I don't support, and a terror entity that is declared as such by the UK, by the EU, by the United States, by all of the world. We're putting them as if they're the same legitimate partners. They're not, just like Hezbollah is not. And we need to do that differentiation. So yes, I think that he has a political agenda. I am not happy with his decisions. And yet, I don't think it's different from the polarization inside the United States between Republicans and Democrats, or even the polarization that I see in the UK. Terrible things happened in France. Look at the results of the elections. Let's compare us to those that we should be compared to, not to Hamas, not to Hezbollah.
Okay, Miri, I really appreciate your time and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you,
now,
sir.
residents of Portugal